everyone. How's it going? Craig, just while we're waiting for everyone, do you want to do an introduction on yourself, and then I'll introduce myself here as well?
Sure. Yeah. Sure. I'm Craig Dore. I'm an RSA veteran, cybersecurity veteran. I've basically worked within cybersecurity for over 20 years, and an RSA is a good proportion of that. I am the field CTO for RSA across APJ, and I handle strategic accounts as well, including lots of Australian government entities, and a good friend of virtual graffiti.
Thanks for that, Craig. And we like to think we're a good friend of yours as well here. Try to make each other's lives a little bit easier, hey?
A little bit easier, yeah.
Fantastic. So guys, a lot of you probably already know me. I'm Legg. I'm the general manager here at Virtual Graffiti. I've been here for I think 7 years now, so quite some time. And then I've been in this IT security space for not as long as Craig, but about 10 to 11 years now. So I'll slowly catch up to you here, Craig, but I think you'll always have a few years on me here. Maybe take
I'll
a little
just retire
vacation.
sooner, Thad. I'll just retire sooner.
Fair. So look, we're talking, I guess, about two things today: the ISM manual and the Essential8. So they're kind of related to one another, but Craig, what I guess you and I have spoken on this topic at length before. What is Essential8, and I'll go into what ISM is here.
Essential8 is like a prescription for how to do security, and it inherits a lot of elements from the Australian Information Security Manual, which in turn is a correlation between the NIST guidelines in the United States and others. And so I feel like with the Australian Signals Directorate or the ASD, they've found it worthy to distill a lot of the valuable info that's in the ISM and provide a prescripted set of guidelines. And so the Essential8 are basically your top 8 in terms of cybersecurity implementation in your organization.
Yeah, fantastic. And what I do like about the ISM here is that the ASD makes it very black and white as to what security controls you do need. And with regards to multi-factor, right? There's the 28, 29 odd different line cards, and I'll show it here within the Information Security Manual in a second, that specifically talk about MFA. And then Essential8 is just what is essential of that. And they actually outline, and here I'll pull it open now, what is the most important bits. So here we are with everything MFA.
Just some light reading for your morning, Thad.
Any compliance template, is always light reading, right? Just 6 a.m. you wake up thinking, let me go ahead and read this out and start the day off, right? So, but what's nice is up here at the top, it has maturity level 3, and where it says, okay, multi-factor, right? Multi-factor, and what is essential? Maturity level 3, and what's maturity level 1 or 2, sort of thing. So that's what I do like about the ISM manuals. It's very black and white in here. So just jumping off, we've talked about us in here. We've talked about the ISM. So what is MFA, Craig? I think we all know, you guys make codes. What's MFA?
Yeah, well, it's a combination of 2 or more different authentication factors, according to the slide, which is actually accurate. It's something and something you have. So the something you have part can be a number of different things. One is a legit security device. And then as an added bonus, some of those devices allow you to prove that you have it with something you are. So what is something you are? It's like your fingerprint, or if you have a special type of webcam, it could be your face, right? And so having multi-factor means just more than one factor. And even two-factor authentication, everyone's heard that term, you can see it in the slide there, is multi-factor because it's just simply more than one.
Greg, is there anything that you see, I guess, these days that like isn't used? I know like text message kind of fell out of fashion in here in terms of that being one of the factors. Voice, like, I guess what aren't we seeing anymore?
Yeah. So in around 2016, I mentioned NIST earlier. It's the National Institute of Standards and Technology, in response to actual attacks that have taken place with respect to the SMS protocol, your text message protocol. So sending codes through SMS has no proof of possession. And there is no common implementation where the sender of the text message that contains your special code will verify the ownership of the phone number that it's sending to. And so because of this, this is easily abused and has been easily abused in multiple respects. So some very, very large historical breaches have taken place because the organization was reliant upon SMS-based two-factor. And so I'll give you one example. Everyone's probably heard of Reddit. Reddit themselves were breached because they were overly reliant on SMS two-factor. Nowadays, the threats have exploded around how you gain access to a multi-factor device, and the act of registration or activating MFA is itself being attacked as well. And so there's a lot of mitigations around that. But just in layman's terms, SMS two-factor, not a good method to protect your organization under certain circumstances.
Yeah, look, and I think if the user has a phone on them anyway, something like that, the authentication app that you guys provide, is kind of a no-brainer from my point of view. I guess it's if they don't have an Android iOS, then hey, here's a physical security.
Yeah. And the way that RSA sees this is that, software-based MFA, say in a dedicated app on your phone, the process of activating that is a security process. So we've seen breaches where the attacker provokes MFA activation in their target. So they go to the help desk and say, hey, I'm the administrator, I need my MFA again. And so there's no lot of verification that the administrator is who they say they are. And then second, the way that RSA sees it is that you may have a smartphone and it's securely registered or activated. From our perspective, you can even get better than that. So using an actual physical device that is securely registered is kind of a gold standard in terms of multi-factor authentication. And I'm not saying that because RSA sells hardware devices that do this. It's just it's a higher level of assurance from a black and white security perspective. At the very top end, you have physical devices. Lower tier would be your software-based apps on your phones, and then the lowest of all would be SMS two-factor, and then even lower than that, which is not a security control at all, is a password.
And well, I mean, I think the nice thing is like RSA doesn't sell phones, right, Craig? So it's not like you're trying to say, hey, you guys need to go buy 1,000 phones. It's just, hey, you need to download this application here on your device, and then that user is a trusted user as soon as they've authenticated into that using, either biometrics or whichever method the organization requires here.
Just on that, just to center on that for a second. So the world has evolved, and securing access before you have an activated MFA on your phone, securing the access to activate that, what we're seeing is attackers attacking that process itself, right? And so what RSA has done, and a number of other vendors have done it as well, is to do something called identity proofing, which is to validate the user who they say they are using a government issued ID. And RSA has hooks into a service that is global that knows what your passport looks like when it's asked for. So we can actually interrogate a passport database held by the government and then compare that against a live image of the person that's enrolling. So this identity proofing requires bits of ID to be used in concert with activating MFA. And we don't say, oh, all users should be doing this all the time. We're not saying that at all. Any potential customer that is concerned, you should do it for administrators. So focus on the privileged people to do identity proofing or identity verification versus, everyone needing to do it. It's a classic balance It's a classic balance between convenience and security. It's always an unhappy marriage between the two. Does ID proofing sound very convenient? No, not at all. But you're sacrificing some convenience to enhance the security. Yeah.
Well, I think it came up with one of the security vendors here, where it's quite publicized now before, where they had a developer, who was actually from North Korea, and they had faked the identity here, and they didn't
see it all the time.
These tricks. Yeah. And I think it was like, wow, if they're able to do that and see the insides of one of these training tools, they might be able to come up with a link that would get around that training tool, or somehow trick our users because they kind of have an inside view of what the security tool is training everyone to do.
And this is real, man. This is happening, and we can provide examples. I mean, if you Googled for 5 minutes, you'd find your own. But even major casino in Las Vegas was breached by exploiting this MFA activation facility, or lack thereof.
Yeah, wow.
Even locally homegrown ones, examples including the famous Medibank breach was through that kind of means.
Yeah, incredible. I think we've gone probably a little sidetracked here, you and I, Craig. But that's why it's always great chatting to you here. Just rolling back into the ISM a bit here. So there's two things, and we're paraphrasing a little bit here because as you saw in the ISM manual, everyone, it's a lot of words, but first things first, they want you to multi-factor into systems, so your Windows devices, your laptops, etc. And that also includes your printers. I saw a post the other day where somebody had left a fake salary raise within the scanner that they had printed off here, and then they had the whole office talking, where they essentially gave themselves a raise by just printing out a fake letter to themselves. But what could have prevented this is maybe a little bit of MFA around that multifunctional device like the printer scanner here. Not going to prevent it every time, but something that can at least tell you, hey, this user was authenticated into the printer and was printing these devices out. And I don't think a lot of people think, does my printer scanner, does that support MFA? I mean, Craig, have you ever thought about it here?
Of course. I mean, that comes into kind of a broader identity governance perspective. So if you have the ability to request and approve arrays or your expense reports, that's a toxic combination of entitlement for the given user. So I'm not coming at it from a hardware perspective or the devices that are being employed, but just simply conceptually, that's just a bad combination of things that can be mitigated through proper ID governance. And come talk to us about ID governance if you like.
Jump into the next one. Single factor. So I guess not everything supports multi-factor, does it? I mean, unfortunately, there's some legacy software, some legacy products out there that exist. I think the ISM does call for exceptions with this, where hey, single factor is the only option you can go do in here. Craig, I'm assuming you guys have some different, I guess, ways you can tackle just single factor if it's required.
Absolutely. So RSA protects more than a lot of what people think it protects, right? I'm routinely encountering customers who are surprised, oh, wow, I didn't know you could do that. So from an endpoint perspective, including into your good old legacy mainframe OSs like ZOS and Unix and Linux, those are not part of the common everyday parlance like ZOS. No one talks about it anymore. But RSA can use pluggable modules that are within those operating systems to protect them. And then if you encounter a resource that cannot be natively protected with stronger authentication, like beyond a password, you jump host it. You lock down the network environment by which you need to authenticate to the envelope around the environment versus the actual resource that's in the environment. So there's many ways and means. I think it's more of a rarity these days to encounter a resource that can only do a password, but they're still out there. I mean, a lot of organizations, businesses rely upon very, very, very old rickety systems that have cobwebs around them, but RSA can obviously help with in tandem with virtual graffiti.
Yeah, and we'll talk on some jump hosts here in a second, but I think I learned something from one of your engineers here the other day, where it was an ancient firewall, but you guys could actually append the password, and at the end of the password, you could do like a rolling authentication code in here that changed the password for that device so that you could securely log in with it, which I thought, hey, that's pretty cool. I haven't seen that out here in the wild before. So yeah, no, there's quite a bit out there that I think you guys can do, and then it aligns back with that ISM. So I'll just jump over. Hey, we have some user account lockouts. If somebody has tried to use the password 1,000 times and they keep failing, maybe lock it out. That makes sense. Let's jump into what a jump server is, Craig, because you just brought it up. So where do you see, I guess, where have you seen people use jump servers the most in here? Is it that legacy application? Is it
everywhere? So a great example is in the banking industry. A lot of environments that interact with the SWIFT payment network. A lot of those systems are a bit old as well, and they may or may not natively support strong authentication. And irrespective of that, within a given environment, you would want to highly restrict access into the SWIFT payments environment that a bank may host themselves. And so jump host is the perfect way to do it. And the jump host can be basically anything. It could be a network device, but it can also be literally a Windows server. And from the RSA perspective, we can natively protect all of those endpoints. Even if it were a Mac OS box that you're jumping through, that falls under the lens of what RSA can offer as well. So yeah, very, very common to have jump servers, a lot of secure networks, and in some cases, not necessarily air-gapped, but highly restricted access into them is where a jump host really fulfills its duty.
And Craig, I think after that, we another 2FA, and then I think we're going to hand off because I think you have a few slides for us as well.
Yeah.
Another method the ISM uses as part of that second factor authentication is issuing certificates here, for maybe wireless access or to access certain IP addresses within the network, to where, hey, as our diagram shows, this laptop and this device have certificates issued to them, but then this mobile device does not. So then you can't access these resources within the organization because these are trusted. These devices are trusted, but this one is not a trusted device. So it's another good method of that 2FA in here.
Yeah, and certificates fall under the lens of the Essential8 as well because of the anti-phishing component of the guidance. And then secondarily, certificates are very well suited when humans aren't involved as well. So a certificate for device level authentication is a great approach, as long as you're carefully managing the certificate. Again, or at the end of the day, the certificate is a private key with a public key signature, and it should have a kind of a strict lifetime and be reviewed consistently. And that's all kind of in my old days. I was a developer in public key infrastructure, and so there's a conversation to be had around certificates. But let me share my screen here.
Yeah, and like something you mentioned there is phishing resistant, which I think is going to come up here in your essential.
It sure is.
Essential8 subsection. So go on. Let's check it out.
Yeah, let's roll on. And great discussion, Thad. And I hope that the audience here has gained at least one or two insights from this discussion. The Australian Essential8, as we said, is a distillation of the ISM, but it's more prescriptive than the ISM. So what they've done is taken like the top 8 things. So it spans well beyond multi-factor authentication. It includes like the disabling of Office macros and doing logging. So those are things that are kind of like, you'd think these were baseline security controls, and they are, but it's an attempt by the ASD to uplift the cybersecurity posture of any organization in Australia and beyond. Even if you're not government aligned. So a lot of government entities and other government affiliates are required to prove adherence to the Essential8, but it doesn't need to stop there. Every organization can and should review the Essential8 in terms of their own environment, whether or not they're compelled to do so or not. So let's move forward. So one of the things that I want to share is so you hear this Essential8, you hear MFA guidance, and then you hear this thing called ML1 or maturity level 1, and you hear maturity level 2 and 3, right? And what I've done is you can see in this table what falls under the MFA guidance that's aligned to maturity level 1 and 2 and 3. And so underneath, we have a definition around internet-facing services. I think we all can agree. We all know what internet-facing services are. Anything that's exposed to a public network is an internet-facing services. But there's some things that fall under this that I think bear some additional scrutiny and definition. So, for example, we can define what MFA is, and we can define what phishing resistance MFA is. And we're going to do that now, but I just wanted to share this table to see what is different between ML1, 2, and 3. And you can see, if you look at ML3 and about halfway down the page, you see something called verifier impersonation resistance. I think that's not a phrase that people wake up in the morning and start uttering, right? So we'll define what that is as well. So let's.
Very good. Are you sure you don't wake up every morning and say that in the mirror five times?
Yeah. Sure. Well, I do, because I've been doing this for too long. So let's talk about it for a second. So MFA, I think we've already defined it very handily, right? It's a combination of more than one factor, and it goes beyond just a password or a passphrase. So it's something you have and something you know, or something you are, or a combination of the something you have requires something you are and something you know. So you can build up on that. And there was a funny joke that I saw where, if anyone's familiar with there's an arcade game called Dance Dance Revolution, where you have to jump on colored squares in tune with music. And someone did a video called Dance Dance Authentication, where they had to do a whole bunch of different things all at once in order to validate who they are when accessing something. Phishing resistant. So this is a concept referred to as FIDO2 or FIDO. So during this presentation, I'm going to call it FIDO, but when people talk about FIDO, they're actually referring to the more modern iteration of this standard called FIDO2. And I'll define what that is. And so being phishing resistant means that somebody who's working in the middle, who's inserted themselves into your conversation with an app or a website, is going to replay your credentials for you and they take over your account that way. And that's a very, very, very common means of exploiting access for users. Now, let me just roll back for just 1 sec, back to this slide. Verifier impersonation resistant. What the heck does verifier impersonation mean? Well, when someone who's an attacker, a threat actor, a bad actor, wants to phish you and trick you, they will impersonate the site that you're accessing, right? And simply they will create a copy of the website that you're accessing that looks and feels like the original. And it tricks users into thinking that they're interacting with the real site. And they'll put in their password and it'll say, no, you typed it wrong, try again. And in the meantime, they're actually accessing a illegitimate copy. So verifier impersonation simply means users get to validate the site, but they don't do that visually. The actual technology takes precedence here. The technology allows the session to validate that it's talking to the actual site versus a fake copy. So we'll get into a little bit more detail in just a moment, but just think about
anyone who operates an e-commerce site has dealt with this issue here before, right?
Of course.
We've seen it.
Yeah. But what happens when you run an e-commerce site is that usually it's the site has to authenticate to the user through a secure session and show the green bar in the address bar. So it's basically it's the reverse is true. The users generally authenticate to a site and they make sure that the site is real. And in this case, the technology is taking care of that for them. So also under the literal guidance around maturity level 3 talks about important data. And that's really why you have a difference between ML2 and ML3. I mean, obviously the requirements kind of ramp up slightly between the two, but it talks about important data. And I think anybody can understand what important data is. It's sensitive data, it's IP, it's PII, anything, healthcare records, all of that kind of stuff. And that is a core aspect of the Essential8 guidance. So let me just say, the Essential8 guidance does not care where the important data is. It could be on-premise in a secure vault. It could be out in public SaaS or public cloud. Doesn't care. Same requirement. You must use phishing-resistant technology in order to access that important data wherever it resides, period. So a lot of people misinterpret this and say, oh, important data, I can't store that in a public cloud, and if I store it on-prem, I'm fine. That is absolutely not true in terms of the Essential8 guidance. It doesn't matter where the data is. And so let me just talk about this phishing aspect, right? You've got the evil hacker, and right now the game is changing underneath our seats as we sit here. So there's AI-based tools that you can provide a screenshot or a URL where the tool will actually craft a website based on that image or URL. It will literally copy it line by line and code by code to reproduce that website. And it can do it literally in seconds. So one popular tool is called Claude Sonnet, and they've released a new iteration of their studio called Artifact. I believe it's called Artifact. And it has a side-by-side developer window and an English level prompt window. And you can paste in what you want and it'll create it. And then second is they use, let's say, domain registrars that are, let's say, a little lax in terms of their validation of whether you're an actual business trying to validate you. And so they can actually mimic a real domain that looks identical to the actual one using Cyrillic and other types of alt codes. And so you as a user have a real hard time knowing whether or not you are accessing the actual Outlook.com or Salesforce.com, right? So evil tricks are, yep.
Have you ever done one of the comparison here, Craig, where they show you
of course.
the pictures, and like I get it wrong half the time as well when it's the acrylic versus the normal. It's almost impossible to sit
Yeah,
there
the
and go,
Cyrillic, you have no idea.
yeah.
You can have no idea. So they're very, very clever using AI tools, and even low tier, low skill script kiddies can use AI tools to do the evil thing, right? So the game's changing, phishing is changing. And then also, you mentioned passphrases. So passphrases, if you'd asked me like 3 years ago, should we use passphrases? And I would say, yes, use passphrases versus a password. What's a passphrase? It's just a whole set of words strung together in a really long, basically pseudo sentence, right? Versus the complex passwords that you know, like ABC, 123, $, right? And so before AI really started to explode with large language models, that's what ChatGPT and others are based on. So these language models know what a passphrase is because they're trained on language, right? And so what has been released, and you can see the Arxiv link there, is a password hacking tool that is LLM and a local language model trained from large real world password leaks. So LLMs can be trained on any type of data. This particular LLM was trained on a whole set of different very large real world password leaks. And so between those things, using AI and LLM technology, we're at the stage where passwords are just going, like if there was never a reason before, and there was, but if there wasn't, we're at a crossroads here where the password is effectively dead. I do not consider a password a security control, period. Yeah. So FIDO. So let's talk about FIDO. So FIDO is an industry consortium. It's not an RSA contrivance, and it's the acronym is Fast ID Online. Yeah. And so a layman's description of what it is, it's just basically a secret key that does a little bit of signing with that key, and allows against a FIDO certified identity provider, say like RSA or other ones, it will have the protected application redirect authentication to that identity provider to validate the registered FIDO key that you're going to use. Okay, so your key that makes this magic work can live in a tamper-proof module inside your phone. So that's great, or an actual legit hardware device, right? And so this is kind of like smart card authentication that we knew of in the 80s and the 90s, right? But it's couched within a set of protocols that FIDO defines for us, and so it has this magical side benefit. So one thing is it does site-to-user verification, and it also can replace your password. So from a benefits perspective around the Essential8, they're calling for anti-phishing technology, which FIDO provides. But at the same time, it has this kind of magic side benefit of allowing you to remove passwords and authenticate just using this security key. Okay, so that's the layman's description of what FIDO is. Let me just go to the next slide here. So some of you in the audience may have heard of something called a passkey, which is built into your popular smartphone brands like Apple and Google, right? And you have to remember that FIDO is an industry consortium, and FIDO is really geared around consumer access to things, securing consumer access, not business access. So one of the things, since they're so consumer focused, Apple and Google, they provide a means within their browsers and their phones to store this secret key inside your phone, right? And then use this secret key to sign in to whatever site that you are. And you're actually doing FIDO authentication there, or FIDO2 specifically. And so think of passkeys as a subset of what FIDO2 offers, right? And these are epitomized within your smartphone and your web browser to make the magic happen, right? But there's a dark side to the passkey. So if you lose your phone, right, one feature or benefit of a passkey is that it will automatically synchronize your secret key that's held inside the phone with the Google Cloud, or on an Apple device to the Apple Cloud. And so one of the common things that happens, I mean, it's not super common, but it does happen, is Google accounts and Apple accounts get defeated, right? They get exploited. Users' accounts get owned. It happens quite routinely, right? You cannot turn off the synchronization of the keys that are held in your phone with the Google Cloud. And so what that does is so since they're auto synchronized, you cannot turn it off. And so where does that leave you if you're using passkeys to protect those confidential IP that the Essential8 talks about, right? This is really, really bad. So it's basically, so RSA is the enterprise adoption chair within the FIDO Alliance. And so we have great and historical representation to talk about enterprise adoption to the FIDO Alliance. And we've talked about this non-synchronized passkeys, right? And so when you have your fortress that you've erected in your enterprise, where you've got IDS and IPS and monitoring and all of that good stuff, when you use passkeys inside of the enterprise, you're turning that into a sandcastle that can fall apart, right? And so RSA, while we do support your Google and Apple passkeys as a FIDO certified identity provider, we can also allow the organization to block their use. And this is a key element, no pun intended, of where RSA sees the security as trumping the convenience aspect of a passkey. So we can basically block cloud synchronized passkeys. So I think I've already defined this, where it doesn't matter where the sensitive information is stored. It could be SaaS or on-prem, but it also extends out to third parties. If you are using a third party or contractor and they're accessing or storing any kind of data, you need to ensure that any access into that data is also protected with anti-phishing technology like FIDO2. Period. So think about the aspects and implications of audit of third parties and how they access your data if they can at all. Even if the data isn't sensitive, you need to have something in place according to the ASD. So it's very, 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 very important for everyone to keep that in mind from an organizational policy standpoint. Let me just do this. So wrapping up here, I know that we've probably gone over, Mr. Thad, but I'd like,
yep. It's okay. We still have a full house here, so we can't be scaring everyone off. Yeah.
So how do you get there? Well, I can speak from the RSA side of things, and there's many, many benefits around RSA, and we've talked about some of those benefits today. And I'm trying to steer away from being an advertisement, but I can say that there are a range of offerings from RSA, including a very special type of hardware token that's a FIDO device and displays your good old Secure ID token code in a little window on the device, right? So this is referred to as the DS100. It's a new or newish, actually, hardware token from RSA that has that USB connector in it. Also, RSA is the sole reseller of something called the iShield. And what's interesting about the iShield, it does OTP as well, but a special variant of it. But it is FIPS certified. So what is FIPS? It's a Federal Information Processing Standard. So governments like it when cryptography, which is really hard to do, is validated by an external auditor. And so that external auditor is NIST again, and they have a set of standards that a cryptography implementer must adhere to and prove to when implementing cryptography, especially in hardware devices. So FIPS certification is super important. RSA is the sole reseller of a FIDO device that is FIPS certified, right? And I'm just being really gauche here, right? I'm being really glossy without getting into a lot of details. But the final piece that I want to say is if your organization is nervous about passkeys and needs to implement FIDO for a large proportion of users, buying hardware devices for all of those users, even from RSA, is just basically a non-starter. It's too expensive, right? Unless you have like massive defense budgets or something like that. But for the rest of us, the RSA app itself is also FIDO certified, and we certified last September. And so as the world moves closer and closer to the Essential8, but also desire to go passwordless, this represents a means to do so under the RSA banner. And then, of course, under the RSA banner is a set of additional benefits, including what I described earlier in terms of ID proofing of your passport or your Australian driver's license during registration, especially for privileged accounts, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just from a perspective, kind of a holistic perspective, you have a range of vendors that can fill little point areas of developing the phishing resistant aspect of the Essential8. RSA covers it from top to bottom versus, little point solutions that might, represent very well anti-phishing or passwordless mechanism, but RSA does it all from the endpoint to the network border all the way into SaaS. Okay, and so through our cloud service that exists inside of Canberra, Australia, in a government data center called the CDC, we offer a range of additional controls that monitor the environment and so on. So from the endpoint to the edge to the SaaS, we have full coverage. And I think that is all I got for you today, Mr. Thad.
Oh, amazing. What I'm going to do here, Craig, is I'm going to link everyone here to the ISM manual. Everyone will get a follow-up with our slides, but I figured we'd leave a minute or two here, or 5 for questions if anyone had some, and we can run through them.
Cool.
Look, just to start us off, Craig, where do you see using hardware tokens still? I think that I think hardware tokens are quite popular. Still, where do you suggest using them?
Privileged use cases, absolutely. So privileged users. And so when you think of privileged users in an organization, that's not just the, system administrator guy or girl, right? It can be a finance officer as well. So what I've seen in terms of adoption of legit hardware FIDO devices is in the hands of executives, even before the sysadmins. Because why? Simply because they access systems that can, unlock financial transactions and bank withdrawals and transfers and so on.
We've got our first question here, Craig, and I don't think RSA has a tool for this. I think Virtual Graffiti can help with this. Does RSA have a tool to check where we are in the path to Essential8, or do you do assessments and advice on which we should address first?
Yeah. So RSA used to sell a governance and policy tool called Archer, but the Archer has long departed from the RSA family. And RSA is solely around secure ID and identity. We are an identity security company. That's what we do. But yeah, I mean, Virtual Graffiti, you probably have a range of things that can help. Yeah.
I think actually we've been doing a promo here where for the next month we'll come in and do a free MFA audit, and we'll run through each one of those ISM security controls and say, okay, let's list out all the applications. Okay, where's your PII? How are we authenticating into that? It does take a couple of days here. Take some forms up front, that take a little bit to fill out. But that is something that we can help with here right away. So great question, and look, we are here to help with those sorts of things. Let's see, we'll give another minute here for any other questions. All right, Craig, any bold predictions for 2025 and 2026 in terms
so
of
in terms of adoption or threats?
Adoption, authentication, threats, wherever whatever your bold prediction is
Yeah, I guess
today.
two things, right? I mean, I think the world has largely woken up to the threat that is AI. Because the AI, it's not like I'm using AI to attack you. No, I'm using AI to build tools that are smarter to attack you with. And it doesn't take a huge amount of skill to build those tools, right? And I talk about this all the time in a series of events that RSA does around the region. From an adoption perspective, like the Essential8 guidance, I've always kind of flown that flag to say, this is good guidance for any organization, even if you're not government. You should establish a baseline for cybersecurity that includes MFA. I think the password's dead. The Essential8 guidance is clear. And I hope that people are very carefully evaluate their approach to passkeys in an enterprise. For your personal accounts, go for your life. I say absolutely start using passkeys wherever you can. If you don't know what they are, or you don't understand it, just have a chat with ChatGPT and ask it to explain it to you in your terms, not a security person's terms. Yeah. So I'm gonna say like adoption of anti-phishing technology is growing. I'm talking about it with government entities all the time. And then on the other side, adoption of passkeys in people's personal lives. Please do it.
Oh, we had another question come in here, Craig, in the
Okay.
meantime. Actually, two.
Yeah.
Here we go. Okay.
Yep.
So how do you implement zero trust for an on-prem infrastructure? And there's probably a few facets of that question, but I'll let you have a crack first.
Yeah, there's a variety of things that fall under the concept of zero trust, and it's zero trust isn't something that you say I'm going to do zero trust and turn it on. And it's a box and it does things. It's not. It's an approach to security that is unique to every single organization that needs to adopt it, right? So for on-prem infrastructure, your job just got actually a little bit easier, right? And so for on-prem infrastructure, you want something like strong authentication to all of the things. But one piece that people think about zero trust is that it obviates or eliminates the need to do multi-factor. I've heard this so many times over the last. So Forrester Research revitalized this concept of zero trust in 2014, and I've been having this conversation ever since. It actually makes multi-factor even more important than it was before, not less important. And one of the reasons is because you need to authenticate the endpoint. It doesn't matter if your network environment is all zero trusty, to put it in this funny kind of way.
I like
but
that phrase.
the means by which you get into that environment needs to be locked down. And so it actually emphasizes MFA on the endpoint itself versus eliminating it entirely. If you think you can just get to zero trust by turning on something, or you don't need MFA anymore, you are sadly misled. Yeah.
And I think that's something that we've always reiterated here. Zero trust isn't just a single point solution. You've got to take in multiple solutions here to really achieve
and approach them differently, because you're removing the assumption around a network boundary. It said if you're sitting in the office and you're on the network, you're fine and you don't get challenged for anything, right? And that assumption gets tossed out the window with zero trust. And so things like SACE and borderless solutions that treat every user the same, irrespective of where they're sitting or where they're coming in from, is absolutely what zero trust is all about. So.
Oh, it goes back to that security versus convenience. With our SACE or SASE solution, I have to authenticate in multiple times per day here.
Yeah.
Right. But yes, it can be, here I go again. However, it is for the best security outcome for the organization, right? You kind of have to breed that culture within your org. Hey, we're security first or security led company. We don't want our data going outside, or PII, or customers' information getting leaked, and we have to keep those things in mind. Just one final question for us, Craig, and
Okay.
both of us can comment. Is there any info or comparison with other FIDO MFA solutions like Yubico, aside from the comparison table on the RSA? So I guess what's the difference between an RSA iShield or DS100 versus a Yubico?
So
NFC token?
YubiKeys are very, very well known, but they don't necessarily implement an identity provider that you can purchase. So YubiKey at the end of the day is just a key, and you can use it anywhere. You can even use a YubiKey within the context of RSA's solution set, right? One of the disadvantages of YubiKey is that it's non-updatable. So you plug this thing in, and let's say in the future some exploit is discovered or some problem with the key, you got to buy a new key. You cannot software update the firmware on the device, right? So one key difference is that the iShield and the DS100, I'm talking for the RSA side, they are software updatable. So if some future problem comes up in a variety of means or whatever it happens, we literally have a utility that can firmware update the device. And the second piece, and this is super important to government entities, and I've had this conversation with government entities, is the security of the supply chain. So where do these keys come from? Where do they transit? And who are they being carried by when they go from A to B, from the manufacturer to the customer site, right? And so supply chain security is something that RSA provides. So we have it'll sound like I'm making this up, but RSA is FedRAMP certified in the United States, which means that there's a giant Bible of prescriptions that we had to adhere to in order to be able to service the federal Department of Defense in the U.S. One of them was a secure facility for device transit. When we either manufacture the devices ourselves, like the DS100, or we use the iShield from its robot factory in Germany, we control the carrier and where the carrier takes it in terms of transit, and then it goes to a secret location in the United States first. And so people don't even know where this location is. They literally, you cannot visit this location. It is not advertised. It's part of the FedRAMP program in the US. And then from there, we control how it gets to the customer, say over here to Australia or New Zealand. Yeah, YubiKey does not offer that. It is an element of RSA's security first strategy, and that security first strategy permeates across everything we do. I'm just giving you, say, a couple of examples. So that's a big difference, right? Yeah.
I think it's telling. I can go on Amazon right now and order some YubiKeys. Who knows where those YubiKeys have been? They could have been in the bottom of the ocean here for 3 weeks, right before they get delivered. And that's,
they might have been transiting through countries that are unfriendly to Australia or other Western nations, right?
Exactly. So I guess things that you've got to keep in mind when you're purchasing any token is, hey, where does this come from? Is there a chance that it could have been compromised beforehand? And
I saw an example, and I've had this conversation before, and it's kind of crazy, but it's fodder for a fun Tuesday morning. So this isn't necessarily new, but it's a growing concern. Is that there have been inventions where you have literally a fully functioning computer that is smaller than a grain of rice, including a Wi-Fi stack inside it. Crazy, right? It doesn't sound possible, right? And people have in the past attached these two devices and carried them into clean rooms. Crazy, right? And so I've literally had conversations about dunking devices into water to fry any component that might have been added after manufacturing. So the concerns around security and surveillance and that kind of thing it basically is a can of worms at that stage when you're talking about, say, state actors who have access to the materials to create these kinds of things. Yeah. So back to, you know, RSA is like we own the facility that produces them and then have secure transit in between that facility and the end customer. And then that extends, that envelope extends out to iShield. So in a modern threat ecosystem, these are things that people should, if they're super paranoid like me, should think about. Yeah. We're living in a different world now.
Yeah, well,
Sorry
I think
to scare everybody.
No, look, and I think it's a good point. You know, I was reading the other day. You know, some of the best security practitioners have the phrase, you know, stay paranoid here, right? And you know that what you do think could come up to get you could be a problem for you. So thanks for that, Craig. Well, look, I think
welcome.
we've had a great event in here, and you know, want to say thank you to you, Craig, of course, and thank you to everyone who's joined us.
Thank you to everyone here.
Well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for coming, everyone.
Absolutely. So look, guys, we'll be in touch with everyone here, and we'll send you through some slides. I've linked the ISM manual, and I'll send through some links on Essential8 as well. But you know, just want to say thank you once again to our friends at RSA for hosting this with us, and thank everyone for the time.
Thanks, Richard, for Graffiti as well. All right. Bye, guys.
Awesome. Cheers, everyone. See ya.